Howdy, welcome back to more JTReacts, and today we're going to be checking out why did American cars fail in Europe. Anytime I see like a drive-in video in the UK or somewhere in Europe, I see these different styles of cars and different brands that I've never even heard of before, and I just always kind of thought, you know, like the big head honchos of the car world, like Ford and GM and all those guys, I just thought they kind of were the top of the list everywhere. But that's really not the case, because cars that people drive here in America are just so much different than cars in Europe. I'm excited to see, like, why did they fail? Like, if I had to guess, maybe size, because, you know, I'm one of the American stereotypes. I got a big old truck, which I live in the middle of nowhere. My road sucks. I need four-wheel drive in the wintertime. Also run a business where I have to have a truck. Most places in Europe, I feel like you don't need a big old truck, even though I'm sure there are big vehicles over there. Probably not as common. And maybe like, I don't know, like how much gas they use and stuff like that. Hey, that's why we're here. We're here to learn, not take guesses. So we're about to get into it. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We're on the road to 30,000 subscribers. I appreciate you guys so much. If you want to see more videos like this, let me know by hitting that like button. But other than that, like, get on up into it.
Why did American cars fail in Europe? Let's explore. I'm sure you're all aware by now that American cars and American manufacturers simply couldn't take off in Europe. No matter how much they tried, two of the big
that thing clean, son.
three simply couldn't get enough people interested in their cars. Why did this happen? Well, the simple answer is they didn't do it properly. And that requires us to start with looking at the one automaker that did do it properly. Ford. Ford is, to all intents and purposes, an American automaker. However, when it came time to expand into the European market, Ford actually put a fair amount of thought into it. They did have a presence before that, but the Blue Oval's European outfit, aptly named Ford of Europe, was founded in 1967, merging the automaker's UK, Germany, and Ireland offshoots.
I guess that makes sense, because I always see like a lot of like Ford Escorts and cars like that, like the small, compact Ford cars. I feel like y'all drive a lot of those over in Europe, so I guess that makes sense.
The Republic of Ireland, by the way. In 1967, the first model to appear from this new merger was the original Transit, which would go on to become the literal face of vans in Europe. Certainly.
Ooh, that's clean, son. Oh, wow.
In the UK, and rightfully so. Ford of Europe continued to do the European expansion properly by opening production facilities all over Europe. Today, the European arm of Ford operates 7 manufacturing facilities on the continent, in the UK, Germany, Romania, Turkey, and Spain. Ford also did this whole thing right by developing and designing cars
Dude, this video being blurry makes me want to put my glasses on. It's hurting my eyes.
Specifically for the European market. The Fiesta, although they tried to market it to North America, which failed miserably, went on to become such a huge success in Europe that they discontinued it last year.
Dang! Why? My dad actually has one of these, a little blue one. They're not super common here in America, but yeah, I do see people driving these. My dad has one, and he loves it. Little 4-speed, dude, it's great.
Nice. Yes, I'm also bitter about the Fiesta's discontinuation, but it really was hugely successful in Europe, and the same applied to one of the C-segment's darlings, the Focus. Ford's first crossover SUV specifically designed for Europe, the Kuga, also did and still is doing great, and the same could be said of their Europe-specific minivans, the C-Max, the S-Max, and the Galaxy, Galaxy spelled with a Y at the end, by the way, which all showed the continent that minivans don't have to be boring. So there we are.
And they look smaller.
Specific minivans, the C-Max, the S-Max.
Those, like, yeah, it's a minivan, but they look smaller than the minivans here in America. They usually have, like, 3-row seating, and they're like, there's a bunch of room with a big trunk. But that looks like more compacts.
And the Galaxy, Galaxy spelled with a Y at the end, by the way, which all showed the continent that minivans don't have to be boring. So there we are, Ford of Europe did everything correctly as far as an expansion to Europe is concerned, which is why they're still very successful here. So what happened to the other two? Let's start with everybody's favorite manufacturer of totally reliable cars, trust me bro, General Motors. Like Ford, General Motors also had a pretty substantial presence in Europe by the latter half of the 20th century. They had acquired Opel fully by 1931, and then in 1990, they acquired Saab and managed to destroy them in just 20 years. Great job. 4 years prior, in 1986, GM also officially formed General Motors Europe, which relegated GM's operations in Europe to Opel, Vauxhall, and then Saab. Now we arrive at the early to mid-90s. This was the time when another, seemingly unrelated but actually very relevant to the story, automaker was entering the European market. Daewoo. Daewoo cars started to trickle into Europe.
Who? The what?
in the 90s with a focus on value for money. The Tico, based on the 80s Suzuki Alto, was
Hey, that's clean. Dude, I love these little cars. What the heck?
beats taking the bus type of vehicle, but it sold like hotcakes, especially in former Yugoslavia.
And I feel like those are probably like super affordable too, ain't they? It's probably really easy to like keep up with maintenance. It's probably really good on gas. I wish we had more cars like this in America.
One above that was the Nexia, which was a small Golf-ish sized
That's clean,
hatchback,
too.
and you could have a sedan too. At the top sat the Espero, which wowed journalists at the time for offering a ton of equipment for basically no money. Continuing into the late 90s, Daewoo's Lanos, Nubira, Evanda, which was also known under 10 different other names, and the horribly ugly Takuma were all doing fine in Europe. And
She ain't ugly. She just, yeah, no.
then Daewoo went bankrupt and General Motors scooped them up in 2002. With General Motors now at the reins of Daewoo, they devised one of the stupidest, most befuddling strategies I've ever heard. General Motors founded Chevrolet Europe in 2005 in Switzerland with the promise that the Chevrolet brand would return to Europe. However, there was a problem. The real Chevrolet's lineup back then was entirely unsuitable for the European market. The Avalanche, the Impala, the Silverado, the Blazer, you get the idea. Big cars,
Yeah.
even bigger engines, terrible gas mileage.
Yeah, those are definitely American vehicles right there. A Trailblazer and a Silverado, yeah. And I don't know why. Why do we love us some big old vehicles that are bad on gas? I don't get
None of
it.
these qualities are something that the average European buyer was looking for. So what did Chevy do? They rebranded Daewoo models from their Korean arm as Chevrolets and sold them in Europe. Yep, instead of doing the Ford thing and opening proper manufacturing facilities in Europe and designing cars specifically for the European market, Chevy just crossed out the letters Daewoo and wrote Chevrolet in Sharpie. And hey
Wow.
presto, new car. This resulted in abominations like the Chevy Spark, the Aveo, the Lacetti, the Captiva, and my personal nut favorite, the Orlando. Sure, you could still buy the Corvette.
Dude, the names are crazy. It's definitely just like a lot of like family cars, you know? I mean, don't get me wrong, these cars, they seem like decent cars, you know? The fact that Chevy just literally just slapped their logo on this company that was doing good and said, oh, here's some Chevy cars for you now. That's just, yeah, that's not the way to do it. The way Ford actually took the time to make cars specifically for Europe with their own designs and everything, yeah, that's how you're supposed to do it.
Captiva, and my personal nut favorite, the Orlando.
The
Sure, you
Orlando.
could still buy the Corvette and the Camaro in Europe, but these were meant to be Chevy's volume sellers. I think that the only somewhat good car to come out of this whole Daewoo bullshit was the Cruze. They were in Macedonia volume
Hey,
sellers.
a Chevy Cruze, that is a good car, yeah.
Because Macedonia is a poor-ass third-world country and people needed cheap cars. Eventually, Chevrolet withdrew from the European market in 2013. By that point, GM had already shuttered Saab due to their bankruptcy issues a few years prior, leaving Opel as the only presence General Motors had in Europe. Until Stellantis acquired Opel in 2017 and made them 15 times better, that is. So there we
Dang.
are. Chevrolet failed in Europe because the Chevrolets that most people were buying were just thinly disguised cheap Korean cars that were about as desirable as getting a sledgehammer to your face. That leaves us with the last remaining member of the big three, Chrysler. Originally, Chrysler had a decent presence in Europe thanks to the merger of Simca, Roots, and Barreiros. Apologies if I didn't pronounce that correctly. And eventually, the PSA Group would continue selling Chrysler vehicles throughout the 80s badged as Talbots. Or at least I think so. That's all the sense I could make of the research I did online. It's a little complicated. So that technically means that Chrysler did the Europe presence thing properly at first. They rebadged various vehicles from the aforementioned brands, all of which were European, and sold them as Chryslers in Europe. That's fine. So what happened? Well, Chrysler was acquired by Daimler AG in 1998. Leading to the creation of Daimler Chrysler. This gave Chrysler money, which they would eventually burn completely, and Daimler was losing so much money on Chrysler that they would sell them again in 2007. However, this also gave Chrysler a channel to re-enter Europe once again. And they did. Now, as I mentioned up there, GM's big mistake was convincing Europeans that they're buying a Chevrolet when they were in fact buying a Daewoo.
Yeah.
In other words, they plucked cheap cars from their Korean arm and sold them to Europeans. So what was Chrysler's big mistake? Chrysler's big mistake was not bothering with basically anything. The relaunch in Europe featured the compact Neon, the Stratus midsize sedan, and the Voyager minivan, or as you may know it, the Town and Country.
Yeah,
Sure,
we had one of those, dude. My dad welded a trailer hitch to the back of our Town and Country minivan.
Stratus midsize sedan
Look,
and the Voyager minivan.
We had one of those just in silver. My dad welded a trailer hitch back there, and we pulled a 17-foot boat with it and fished everywhere, son. The looks you get backing a boat down with a Town and Country minivan at the boat ramp, it's so sick.
Or as you may
It's a good vehicle, though. That thing ran until it absolutely could not run anymore, you know?
know it, the Town and Country. Sure, the Voyager offered a diesel engine and a manual transmission because Europe, am I right? The Stratus, which was actually a Dodge vehicle by the way, was available with either a 4-cylinder or a V6 engine. Remember, mid-sized sedan in Europe in the 90s with no diesel power. Here's an interesting fact: the cops in Macedonia used the Stratus for the longest time as a patrol vehicle. And as far as I've heard, all but a few of them went memories up, and I'm pretty sure that nobody else except the police force actually bought them as civilian vehicles. Either that or they all exploded or destroyed themselves, I don't know. Chrysler's not bothering with basically anything continued well into the late 2000s. The widely hated Dodge Nitro was worse than other European SUVs.
That is, dude, there are multiple of these that I see all the time in my little town, and they are usually the, like, ugliest vehicles ever. Like, look at it, bro. It is just a shoebox with some wheels on it, like,
in just about every way, and it was too big for Europe. The 300C, while it did receive a wagon version, which was just a Dodge Magnum with a front end swap, and a diesel engine from Mercedes, was still worse than the European competitors in just about every conceivable way. Chrysler even tried to sell the widely hated Sebring to European customers. Yes, that includes the convertible too. Again, these were all vehicles designed for—
Wait, the Sebring has a convertible? What? This is a very common car here in America. I see a lot of these. Ain't no way they got a convertible.
To European customers. Yes, that includes the convertible too. Again, these were all vehicles designed for the American market, and Chrysler simply brought them over and updated them slightly to meet European regulations. They were practically unchanged from their American counterparts. And that's a problem because it's a well-known fact that American and European car buyer tastes are vastly different. Oh, how could I forget? Chrysler also tried selling the PT Cruiser in Europe. That went about as well as you'd expect. The writing was on the wall. The 300
PT Cruisers and what's the Chevy? HHRs. They're ugly. They are ugly, son. But they're good cars. My sister has one. Dude, that thing, I feel like any other car, it would be at the junkyard by now. That thing starts up and runs and goes anywhere, son. They're actually really decent cars.
300C completely lost to the E-Class A6 and 5 Series, which is hilarious because the 300C of that time was based on the E-Class. The Stratus, meanwhile, lost out to stuff like the Passat, the Honda Accord, the Renault Laguna, the Audi A4, the Mercedes C-Class, and so on. The Jetta and every other C-segment sedans were running rings around the Sebring, and every other European minivan, the VW Charan, the Ford S-Max and Galaxy, yes, they were made by Ford of Europe, it counts, the Peugeot 807 and its siblings kick the Voyager's ass 10 times over. Eventually, Chrysler just completely lost its mind and decided to continue its presence in Europe in an entirely new and balls-to-the-wall way. The second-generation Lancia Thema was the second-generation Chrysler 300C with a few Lancia badges, and the Lancia Voyager was the same thing but for the later Town and Country. I also realized I completely forgot to write in the script that Lancia models were sold as Chryslers in the United Kingdom for no reason that I can think of. There probably is a reason, probably a weird, unusual reason either way. They did the long walk of shame back to North America, and eventually they wound up selling to Americans all of 2 cars, one of which recently went out of production. Nowadays, Stellantis is focusing its efforts on other Mopar vehicles, and Chrysler is left with just a single model, the Pacifica minivan. But that one is pretty good from what I've read, so that's okay. And those are the reasons why American cars in Europe failed.
Dude, I did not expect, I didn't know they would go in, get all these different, car brands that have been doing good in this certain country, and just buy them up and slap their logo on it and say, hey, here's our cars. Yeah, this is all us now, son. I thought you had to, come with something new, you know? And I guess that's why Ford actually stuck around and did relatively good, because that is what they did. But yeah, I guess I was kind of right. You know, American cars that are made for driving in America probably ain't gonna do too well in Europe. But alright guys, that is going to do it for why did American cars fail in Europe. Y'all let me know what y'all think down in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this, let me know by hitting that like button. If you are new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We're on the road to 30,000 subscribers. I love you guys so much, and I will see y'all tomorrow.